The Zarnak Empire had never lost a war because they believed they were the strongest in the galaxy and no other species could match their power or technology. So when their scanners picked up a small blue planet at the edge of the Orion sector, they smiled and called it an easy target. They called the planet Earth, and the Zarnak leader, General Vorth, stood inside his flagship looking at the hologram of Earth with cold eyes and sharp teeth and said this will be over in one day. His crew laughed and nodded because that was always true for them, and they had done 100 times before and no one had stopped them yet, so why would Earth be any different? The Zarnak sent one scout ship first just to test the humans and measure their strength. So they landed in the middle of a desert with heavy armor and plasma rifles, expecting humans to run or fall to their knees. But the humans did not run, and they did not hide either because they had seen the ship coming and they had already prepared something special for the visitors. When the Zarnak soldiers stepped onto the sand, they found no one there, and the air was hot and dry and quiet, too quiet for comfort, and they started scanning the area when suddenly one of them exploded into pieces. The others turned quickly, but it was already too late because snipers hidden in the rocks had perfect aim and they fired bullets, not lasers, just metal bullets, fast and deadly and straight through Zarnak armor. The soldiers screamed and tried to fire back, but the humans moved like ghosts and used the heat and wind and rocks as their shield, and before the aliens knew it, half their squad was gone. Back on the ship, General Vorth received the signal of emergency and saw the live feed of his soldiers falling to simple human weapons, and his jaw clenched in anger. He shouted this cannot be and ordered 2 more ships to launch with more soldiers and better armor, but he did not understand that the humans had already studied the first ship and cracked its patterns and knew how to blind its sensors. In the dark night, the second wave arrived, but instead of landing, they were hit by a storm that should not have been there because the humans had used weather drones to create it, and the Zarnak ships lost control and crashed into the mountains. The third ship managed to land in a city, thinking maybe the humans there would be peaceful, but the moment the doors opened, a wave of sound hit them so strong it broke their ears, and right after that came firebombs and smoke and dozens of strange, small flying machines that dropped explosives. The aliens fired back, but found nothing to shoot because the humans had already disappeared into alleys and rooftops and sewers like shadows, and they attacked from every side without being seen. The Zarnak were powerful and smart, and they had better tech, but they were used to open battles and clear targets, not chaos and confusion, not an enemy that never showed its face. General Vorth watched the reports, and his confidence began to crack, because never before had they lost 3 squads in one day on a primitive world, and it made no sense to him. He called his advisors and demanded answers, and one of them said, maybe humans are not as weak as we thought, and maybe they know more than we think. But Vorth refused to believe it and slammed his fist on the table and shouted, send the full invasion force. Now no more games, crush them before this embarrassment grows. Yet even as he said those words, something inside him felt cold because Earth had already taken something from him, and it was not just soldiers or ships, it was control. The humans had broken the Zarnak rhythm and made them react instead of lead, and that was the first sign of danger, because the Empire had always been the hunter, and now they were being hunted. Back on Earth, the humans celebrated their first victories in silence because they knew the real war was just starting, and they had seen the size of the ships in orbit and knew more would come. But they were not afraid because Earth was not like the other worlds the Zarnak had crushed before, because humans were different. They did not have laser weapons or star fleets or alien power, but they had something better. They had experience in fighting dirty, and they had a history of survival. Every time someone tried to take Earth, they had failed in the end, and the humans had always paid the price in blood, but they had never given up. And this time, they had one more advantage, the element of surprise, because the Zarnak still thought this was going to be easy, and that belief was their greatest weakness. So while General Vorth prepared for a full attack, the humans were already building traps, studying their enemy, and planning the next move. Because they had made a choice, they would not go down like the others, they would make the Empire regret this forever. And that mistake had already begun. The Zarnak Empire thought the humans would surrender after the first strike, but Earth did not break, because it had been preparing in silence, watching the stars, and waiting for something just like this to come from the dark sky and challenge their right to exist. When a second wave of Zarnak forces landed across the continents, they were met not with organized armies, but with something far more dangerous, something the Zarnak had never faced before and could not understand. They faced chaos, controlled chaos, shaped by knowledge, history, and raw human will. In the forests of the North, humans used their land like a weapon. Every tree, every root, every rock became part of the battlefield, and the aliens soon learned that even stepping off the path could trigger a deadly trap, because the humans had wired the land with hidden bombs and sharp spikes covered in poison made from local plants. Zarnak soldiers who laughed at the primitive tools found themselves bleeding and lost and screaming for help while shadows moved around them without sound. In the cities, it was worse because the streets became a maze of ambushes and illusions. Buildings were empty or full of explosives, cars rigged to explode, and alleys led nowhere or in a crossfire where humans waited with silent rifles and cold eyes. The Empire had never trained for this. They were built for open combat, not survival in places where nothing made sense and where the enemy never showed his face. The humans used everything. Old cell towers turned into jammers, sewage tunnels became transport lines, rooftops became sniper nests, and children passed messages like whispers, while elderly people acted as bait to draw the invaders into traps. And they did it all without orders from any government, because the governments were gone or hiding or broken, but the people fought anyway because they had nothing else and they would not let their planet fall. One Zarnak officer sent a report back to command saying, "We're not fighting soldiers, we are fighting ghosts and monsters, and the ground itself hates us, and even the animals attack us, and the wind whispers death." General Vorth read the message and crushed the datapad in his claw, because he still refused to believe that Earth could resist for long, and so he sent in more troops, better weapons, bigger ships, and newer machines. But Earth adapted faster than expected, because every failure became a lesson, and every death gave birth to new ideas and stronger defenses. The humans began capturing wounded Zarnak soldiers and studying their bodies not for revenge, but for science and survival, and they learned fast. Doctors in underground labs figured out how Zarnak armor worked and how their breathing systems could be clogged with simple dust mixed with oil, and how their eyes reacted to light in a way that made them easy to blind with homemade flares. Hackers in cold basements cracked the Empire's communication channels by stealing pieces of their tech, and soon human teams could listen to Zarnak orders and ambush their patrols before they even moved. The Zarnak thought they were superior because they had plasma and shields, but humans had something else, something far more dangerous. They had curiosity and fear and desperation, and that made them unstoppable. In one coastal town, a group of teenagers lured an entire alien unit into an old shipyard and trapped them inside a cargo hold, then set it on fire using gasoline and scrap metal, and recorded the whole thing and sent the video to other cities as a sign of hope. Soon all across the planet, resistance groups formed not just to fight, but to share knowledge and ideas and weapons, and each one found new ways to defeat the invaders with nothing more than tools and courage. The Zarnak Empire began losing ships in the sky, not to advance fleets, but to hijack satellites that had been turned into kinetic weapons and smashed into enemy cruisers at high speed. They lost squads in the jungle, where vines were rigged with blades and rivers were filled with chemicals that burned through armor. They lost their confidence because the enemy would not stand still and would not fight by the rules and would not surrender. In space above the planet, Zarnak engineers tried to block Earth's atmosphere to cause panic and fear, but within hours, human scientists used old rockets and targeted the blockades with modified warheads, and the sky burned with falling debris that lit up the night like fireworks. The world watched and remembered. Even in other galaxies, old enemies of the Zarnak began to whisper, maybe Earth is different, maybe this small planet is not like the others, maybe it can win. On Earth, one soldier named Carter led a unit that operated only at night and was never seen during the day. They called themselves the Night Dogs, and they used sound to hunt the aliens, recording their strange voices and playing them back through hidden speakers to confuse and terrify the enemy. Another leader, an old woman named Layla, used to be a school teacher, but now commanded a group of fighters in the mountains, and her strategy was to starve the invaders by cutting supply lines and poisoning food drops with plants that caused madness in Zarnak biology. These humans were not chosen by any leader or trained in any academy. They rose from the dirt and smoke of their dying cities and fought with every breath and every heartbeat. They were not heroes, they were survivors, and that made them more dangerous than any army the Empire had ever faced. General Vorth watched as daily reports came in showing more losses, more confusion, more fear, and more failure, and he began to understand something that made his claws shake. This was not a rebellion, and it was not an invasion gone wrong. It was a war he could not win because the humans were not just defending Earth, they were becoming something new. They were learning, evolving, growing stronger with every hour, and more united than ever before, not under one flag, but under one idea that Earth belongs to Earth, and no one would take it without facing the wrath of every human soul on the planet. So while Vorth sent more reinforcements, the humans dug deeper, spread wider, and became invisible, and soon the Zarnak were afraid to walk alone or sleep at night or open any door without checking it twice. The Empire had thought this planet was weak and easy and soft, and now they were trapped in a nightmare of their own making. And still the humans were just getting started because the hidden war had only begun. The sun rose over shattered cities and burned forests and broken fields as the humans stood among the ruins and refused to fall, because they had learned one truth, and that truth was simple: the Zarnak Empire could bleed, and if something can bleed, it can be beaten. The early victories gave the humans hope, but hope alone was not enough, and they knew this, so they turned pain into purpose and loss into lessons, and every dead friend became a reason to fight harder and smarter. The Zarnak commanders kept sending reports of human attacks that made no sense because the humans did not follow patterns, they did not follow rules, and they did not care for tradition or honor. They only cared about one thing: survival. One young human engineer named Rafik built a device from pieces of a crashed Zarnak drone and parts of an old microwave, and when he turned it on, it sent out a frequency that scrambled the navigation systems of enemy ships flying over his city, causing one to spin out and crash into the ocean. An old man named Jonah, who once hunted deer in the mountains, became a legend after using a handmade bow to take down a Zarnak officer from 300 meters because he had studied the alien movements for days and waited for the perfect shot through the soft spot behind the neck armor. Teenagers broke into abandoned science labs and figured out how to reprogram small cleaning robots to sneak onto Zarnak transports and detonate once inside the cargo hold, while children ran messages through destroyed neighborhoods under sniper fire because they were fast and small and too brave to be caught. Each human death taught the resistance something new about the enemy: how they breathed, how they moved, how they communicated, and even how they reacted to fear, and that knowledge spread like wildfire through the underground. Soon human fighters began carrying weapons made from Zarnak parts combined with Earth technology: plasma blades, fueled by car batteries, grenades, triggered by old mobile phones, and armor reinforced with scrap metal and broken glass. They studied Zarnak biology and found weaknesses: the aliens had hidden organs sensitive to sound and pressure, their eyes were vulnerable to ultraviolet flashes, and their joints could be frozen with cold mist made from liquid nitrogen stolen from labs. One nurse named Alina discovered a way to poison the Zarnak through their food packs by adding a bacteria that did not harm humans but caused violent seizures in the alien body, and she taught others how to grow and use it effectively. The resistance moved like shadows, but their actions were loud: every strike more daring, every plan more complex, every win more painful for the Empire. A group of hackers led by a quiet girl named May infiltrated a Zarnak battle network and turned their own drones against them in the middle of a firefight using nothing but a modified gaming console and stolen frequency codes from a destroyed scout ship. The Zarnak soldiers began to panic. They started refusing to land in certain zones, they shot at shadows and feared the dark, and some even broke ranks in the middle of missions because the fear of unseen human traps grew too strong. A special ops squad sent to capture a human commander disappeared without a trace, and weeks later their armor was found stacked neatly in front of a burning Zarnak outpost with a message carved in metal that read, "You are not welcome here." General Vorth grew silent and cold as he read each failure and report, and tried to understand how this primitive planet had turned into a nightmare and how every new strategy fell apart under the weight of human unpredictability. He sent in elite hunters with advanced cloaking and adaptive AI, but the humans lured them into a frozen valley and used heat sensors to track their footprints, then used EMP bombs to disable their cloaks and finish them with crossfire from hidden bunkers. The Zarnak were forced to retreat from several zones, and for the first time in Empire history, they marked Earth as a Class Red combat zone, which meant high danger and no guaranteed success. The galaxy watched as the once mighty Zarnak stumbled through the smoke and ash of a planet they had once mocked and began to whisper that maybe Earth was not a mistake, but a message. One soldier named Malik led a small team into a crashed enemy ship and hacked the communication array to send a single broadcast across Zarnak space, showing the faces of his team and the ruins behind them, as he said, "We are not afraid of you, and we will never stop fighting, and if you want this planet, come and take it." That message became famous across dozens of systems, and it inspired other species who had been conquered to begin rising up in small ways, planting seeds of rebellion. But Earth was still bleeding, still hurting, still burning, and every gain came with a cost, and every night was filled with silence for those who did not return. Still, the humans did not stop because they had seen what the Zarnak were and what they did to the weak, and they had made a promise, not just to each other, but to the stars that no one would enslave them. One village in the mountains held off a Zarnak tank for 3 days using nothing but dynamite stolen from a mine and a system of tunnels built over generations, and when the tank finally exploded, the villagers stood around the flames and held hands in silence. Scientists worked side by side with mechanics, and soldiers with farmers, and hackers with hunters, and children with doctors, because on Earth everyone was part of the war and everyone had a part to play. The lessons learned in blood were burned into memory and passed down not through books or training, but through stories told by firelight and whispered into the ears of the next fighter ready to take a stand. The Zarnak Empire did not understand this kind of war, because they believed power came from ships and lasers and numbers, but the humans showed them something else. Power came from pain, turned into purpose, from weakness, turned into rage, and from loss, turned into unity. And now, every time a Zarnak soldier landed on Earth, he did so with the knowledge that the ground itself might rise against him, and that the wind might carry a message of death, and that even the silence was not safe. Because Earth had become a teacher, and the Empire was learning what pain truly meant. The sky above Earth burned with streaks of fire as another Zarnak city ship fell from orbit, a massive structure that once hovered with pride, now spiraling in flames as pieces broke off and scattered across the atmosphere like dying stars. The humans on the ground watched from rooftops and mountain peaks as the fireball painted the sky red and orange and gold, and for a moment the world stood still, not in fear, but in awe, because they had done it with stolen code and broken parts and the minds of those who refused to give up. It started with a group of resistance techs hidden in a cold basement deep beneath a shattered city. They had no names known to the enemy, only call signs, and a shared goal to bring one of those floating monsters down. They studied Zarnak encryption night and day, using signals stolen from broken drones and hacked communication towers. They built software from scrap and ran simulations on computers powered by old car batteries and solar panels and hope. When they found a weakness in the orbital control systems, they knew it would be their only chance, so they launched a signal through a hijacked satellite and waited as the giant above began to shake and turn and finally fall. The crash destroyed a valley, but it also shattered something far greater. It shattered the illusion of Zarnak invincibility. Across the galaxy, people watched the footage of the mighty ship crashing and knew then that Earth was not just fighting, it was winning in ways no one thought possible. The Zarnak command tried to silence the news, but it was too late, because the images had already spread to distant systems and were being shared in secret among oppressed species who had lost hope long ago. Inside the Empire, there were whispers growing in the dark corners of colonies and stations, whispers that spoke of human fire and resistance, of weakness turned to strength, of a world that refused to kneel. Back on Earth, the victory gave a resistance new strength. not just in numbers, but in belief. They saw that the enemy could be hurt even in the sky, and they began working faster, building new tools, finding new cracks, and pushing every limit. Young inventors created signal disruptors from radios and microwave towers, blocking Zarnak drones mid-flight and forcing them to fall like birds with broken wings. In the forest, fighters started using magnetic mines to disable armored walkers by targeting their joints and leaving them stuck in the mud like ancient statues. A team of mountain climbers turned warriors planted a sonic emitter on the peak of a cliff and triggered it as a Zarnak squad passed below. The pulse shattered their helmets and sent them fleeing without ever seeing a single human face. The aliens began to fear not only death, but the unknown, because every attack came from the shadows, every explosion from a place they thought safe, and every loss felt like a lesson they could not understand. General Vorth watched the reports come in and saw the numbers twist against him: supply ships, missing outposts, destroyed command links, severed, and morale broken. He tried to send in more forces, but the soldiers were no longer confident. Some even questioned orders, others requested transfers away from Earth. The fear had taken root, and it was growing faster than any weapon, because the humans had turned the battlefield into a place of ghosts and phantoms and endless traps. Zarnak strategists suggested a retreat to regroup, but Vorth refused and demanded one final push to crush the resistance completely. He gathered his elite forces, the strongest warriors with the best tech, and sent them to key locations across the planet. They landed in the ruins of cities, in the depths of jungles, and on frozen tundras, ready to end the fight, but they were not ready for what they found. In one city, the humans lured them into underground tunnels and flooded the passages with water, then released electric traps powered by stolen batteries, shocking entire squads into unconsciousness before dragging them away into the dark. In a desert base, a group of Zarnak engineers were surrounded by nothing but sand and silence until the ground exploded beneath them, revealing hidden caverns filled with fighters who attacked with precision and vanished just as quickly. In the north, a convoy of enemy tanks was stopped by a frozen lake that cracked under their weight, pulling them into icy water, while drones filmed the entire collapse and sent the footage to every resistance group as proof that the Empire was not unstoppable. Across the stars, the message kept spreading: Earth fights, and Earth learns, and Earth will never bow. The Zarnak Empire began to crack, not with explosions or gunfire, but with doubt and fear and the quiet realization that they might have made the worst mistake in their long and bloody history. Inside the Empire capital, officials began to worry about rebellion within their own ranks, because the soldiers returning from Earth were not the same. They spoke of shadows and whispers of traps and terror in a world that seemed alive and angry. Some younger commanders questioned why they were still fighting and asked why this small blue planet was worth the cost, and those questions began to echo louder each day. The resistance noticed the change and pushed harder, targeting supply lines, attacking key officers, broadcasting captured audio of Zarnak units begging for backup that never came. One special unit of human fighters, known only as the Ash, ran a series of missions that targeted Empire storage depots across 3 continents, destroying food reserves and fuel supplies while planting fake orders to send confusion through the enemy ranks. Another group, called the Iron Tongue, hacked a major Zarnak broadcast station and sent a signal that played across multiple systems, a message from a child's voice saying, "We are still here, and we are not afraid." The Empire tried to strike back harder, but the damage was done because they were no longer in control. They were reacting to the resistance, to the chaos, to the humans who had become something far beyond what they expected. And above all, they were reacting to fear. One alien officer captured by humans broke down during interrogation, not from pain, but from silence. He said, "Nothing is worse than the quiet, because in the quiet I know they are near." The humans had won something priceless: the psychological war. They had become symbols of terror to the Empire and symbols of hope to the rest of the galaxy. The balance had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Earth had become more than a battleground. It had become a symbol, and symbols are hard to destroy. General Vorth stood alone in his chamber and looked at a map of Earth with red marks scattered like bleeding wounds, and he knew this was no longer a simple mission, no longer a simple war. It had become something else, something deeper, something eternal. And Earth was winning. The sky above Earth no longer belonged to the Zarnak because the humans had taken it back, not with massive fleets or advanced technology, but with courage and stolen fire. They had found the wreckage of a fallen Zarnak cruiser buried deep in a forest, its hull split open like the shell of a broken beast, and instead of fear, they felt curiosity and hunger and a burning will to learn. Engineers scavenged pieces of the engine and brought them to hidden labs where scientists with no formal training used soldering irons and scrap computers to unlock secrets once thought impossible. The first breakthrough came when a young woman named Alina discovered a way to power a damaged Zarnak drive core with nothing but a city's broken power grid. She turned it on and watched as the floating wreck rose above the trees and hovered still and silent like a sleeping god. From that moment, everything changed because Earth no longer feared the stars. The humans began rebuilding the broken ship using metal from collapsed skyscrapers and glass from shattered windows and technology pulled from the hands of fallen enemies. They shaped it into something new, something that belonged to Earth. It was not sleek or beautiful. It was rough and strong and built with purpose, every wire and plate forged by hands that had held rifles and carried wounded friends across burning streets. They named it Dawnfire, and when it lifted into the sky, the people on the ground cheered because they knew what it meant. They were going to fight back. Other resistance cells followed the example, taking broken weapons and reverse engineering them, building railguns from train parts and shield from construction materials and armor suits that ran on motorcycle engines. The Zarnak still held the edge in pure technology, but they were slow and structured, while humans were wild and chaotic and refused to play by rules. One resistance leader, named Yuri, formed a team called Echo 9, made of mechanics, hackers, and former soldiers. They hijacked a Zarnak mining vessel and turned it into a mobile war platform capable of disabling enemy ships with focused electromagnetic blasts. Another group, led by a scientist named Dr. Kieran, developed a virus that targeted the neural links between Zarnak soldiers and their command AI, causing temporary blindness and confusion. They deployed it during a key battle over a ruined city and watched as enemy squads stumbled and turned on each other while humans moved in silently. The resistance no longer ran from the fight. They chased it, hunted it, and pulled the enemy into places where advantage meant nothing and only heart and grit remained. Even the animals seemed to rise against the invaders as trained falcons carried incendiary packs into supply convoys and wild dogs followed human fighters in a battle, dragging supplies and sniffing out wounded. The forests grew thick with traps, and the rivers carried mines disguised as debris, and every mountain pass echoed with warnings broadcast on old radios set to loop messages in every known Zarnak dialect. The humans began to reach out to other species enslaved or conquered by the Empire, sending encrypted messages through stolen transmitters offering help and knowledge and the promise of freedom. One of the first to answer was the Verona race, once known for their peaceful nature, now bound in chains on factory worlds. They received a message carried by a hacked satellite and answered with a single word: hope. Other voices followed: the Kaltori, the Gravan, the Ixal, all once broken, and now rising slowly like embers waiting for flame. Earth had lit the match. The first joint strike happened near the outer moons of a gas giant, where a Zarnak fuel station floated unguarded. The humans arrived in retrofitted shuttles, with Veruan support ships, hidden in asteroid shadows, and struck fast and hard, destroying the station before the enemy even knew they were there. The message was clear: Earth was not alone, and the Empire was not safe. Back on the surface, human resistance fighters began wearing pieces of Zarnak armor, painted with Earth colors: green, brown, gray, and black, symbols of unity drawn across their chests. Each squad carried their own flag, each fighter their own story, and still they marched together under the same idea: Earth fights, Earth survives, Earth strikes back. Zarnak forces became desperate, launching heavy assaults on known resistance hubs, but every time they thought they had the upper hand, the humans vanished and reappeared somewhere else, striking with precision and fury. One elite unit, led by a former firefighter, known only as Torch, used flame weapons against Zarnak factories, burning their fuel and melting their machines while playing old Earth music through loudspeakers that echoed across the hills. Another team, called the Vultures, captured Zarnak flyers low through valleys, dropping repurposed bombs made from alien tech and scrap metal. They never stayed in one place and never left a trail. The Resistance used fear as a weapon, now whispering through enemy channels, playing recordings of Zarnak screams, mixed with static, sending false commands that lured squads into ambushes or away from key positions. Zarnak morale collapsed faster than anyone expected. Some soldiers dropped their weapons and tried to hide, others begged for extraction that never came because their commanders were too afraid to send more troops into the chaos. General Vorth raged behind his walls, demanding answers from his advisors, who offered only silence or trembling excuses because none of them knew how to stop a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. On Earth, the first official human-alien alliance was signed beneath the ruins of an old observatory where leaders of the Veruin met with human commanders and drew a pact in both languages, carved into stone and sealed with a gesture of peace. The Resistance broadcast the event across every frequency possible, forcing the Empire to watch as their former slaves stood beside the humans not as tools, but as brothers in arms. Dawnfire led the first attack on a border outpost beyond Earth orbit, accompanied by Veruin warships and drone swarms built by Earth teenagers who once played games and now shaped battles as Zarnak defenders surrendered without a fight. Every victory pushed Earth closer to the stars and further from the shadow of fear, and every fallen soldier was remembered not in silence, but in fire and steel as part of something greater. The humans no longer asked how long they could hold, they asked how far they could reach, because the galaxy was wide and wounded, and they had something it needed. A spirit that would not break, a voice that would not go silent, a fire that would not die. Humanity was no longer defending Earth. It was reclaiming the stars. The last lights of the Zarnak Empire flickered across the stars as their proud warships drifted aimlessly through silent space, their control broken. There will shatter their legacy, sinking into the black void of defeat. Earth had not simply survived, it had risen, it had climbed from the ashes of ruin and stood tall, with weapons built from wreckage and unity forged from suffering, and now it stood at the gates of Zarnak Prime, ready to end what they started. The plan was not written by generals or high command. It was whispered through encrypted channels drawn on walls with chalk mapped on old paper and carried in memory from fighter to fighter, a living strategy that moved faster than any empire could follow. The Resistance did not bring fleets. They brought silence. They did not march with drums. They moved like shadows. They did not aim to conquer. They came to finish it. A small team of humans and Veruin led the assault, slipping through outer defenses using stolen codes and stealth drives powered by hybrid engines made in Earth's underground labs. They breached the planetary shield by weaving through supply lanes and mimicking traffic patterns learned from months of observation. Once inside, they landed in the darkest corner of the capital, not in the center, not near power, but in the forgotten places where factories lay quiet and smoke no longer rose. They split into cells and vanished into the veins of the city like blood through ancient stone. They did not fire the first shot. They cut the power grid with viral code. They jammed communications with static and false orders. They disrupted transportation by rerouting trains and crashing drones into traffic hubs. They released messages across the network, voices of those lost voices of resistance, telling the truth to a population that had been fed lies for generations. The Empire's people heard the stories of Earth, of its pain, and its victory, of its fight for survival, and its will to rise, and they listened not with anger, but with fear and shame, because deep down they had always wondered if the Empire was right, and now they knew it was not. Zarnak officers scrambled to respond, but found chaos at every turn. Their soldiers confused their systems, compromised their orders, tangled in layers of deception. Every move they made countered before it began. The humans did not need to fight every soldier. They fought the system. They turned the strength of the Empire into its own prison. they hacked targeting systems. So they missed, they looped surveillance feeds. So cameras saw only stillness, they used sound and light to blind and deafen and disorient. In one sector, a human squad entered a weapons facility, posing as technicians using forged identification drawn from capture devices. They planted charges in key locations and walked out before the alarms ever triggered. The entire building collapsed 10 minutes later with no shots fired. In another zone, a group of Veruan saboteurs disrupted the Empire's food distribution by overloading storage systems and contaminating supplies with a harmless but terrifying chemical that made anyone who consumed it hallucinate for hours, spreading confusion through the ranks. The capital began to crack not from invasion, but from within, because the people started asking questions, and when no answers came, they stopped obeying. Factories shut down as workers refused to report for duty, fearing another explosion or sabotage. Civilian transports grounded as pilots disappeared into the resistance. Crowd power stations failed as engineers joined the cause. One by one, the machine that fed the Empire's war engine came to a stop. General Vorth stood in the war chamber, surrounded by flickering maps and failing signals, his face a mask of rage and disbelief as he watched the core of his world slip through his claws. He shouted orders, but none came back. He demanded reinforcements, but no ships arrived. He called for loyalty, but heard only silence. Above the capital, the skies darkened as dawn fire emerged from the clouds, surrounded by a fleet of allied ships, Veruan cruisers, Earth-built corvettes, and exhilarating craft, all moving as one, each carrying warriors from dozens of worlds, once broken, now burning with purpose. They did not open fire. Instead, they hovered as a message played across every screen. In the Empire, not a threat, not a demand, but a truth. You came to Earth thinking we were weak, but weakness taught us to stand together. You burned our cities, but fire forged our will. You killed our people, but pain gave us power. You thought you ended us, but we're just beginning now. We come not for revenge, but for freedom. Surrender and rebuild, or fall with your lies. The words echoed through the halls of government, through training grounds, through homes and bunkers and prisons, where the oppressed finally saw the chance to rise, and they did. Entire divisions of Zarnak soldiers dropped their weapons and joined the uprising, disarming their officers, locking down their own command centers, turning their guns on the Empire that had fed them false glory. The capital erupted not in battle, but in revolution, as civilians and soldiers side by side tore down statues, erased symbols, burned flags, and raised their own voices above the ruins. The resistance moved, quickly securing key zones, stabilizing power, restoring peace, and offering aid to the wounded, both friend and former foe, because this was not about destruction, it was about ending the cycle. General Vorth fled the chamber in a stolen vessel, trying to escape to the outer rim, but a small human team, led by Commander Reyes, intercepted him in orbit. They boarded his ship with precision and speed and found him cowering behind his throne. He offered no resistance as they took him in chains. He was brought before a tribunal, not to be executed, but to answer for his crimes, to face the galaxy and speak of what he had done and why. And as he stammered and stumbled, the people saw the truth, not of a leader, but of a coward masked in steel. Zarnak Prime was no longer the capital of an empire. It became the heart of something new, a place where old wounds began to heal, where enemies became allies, where silence gave way to song. Earth's flag did not fly alone. It flew beside the banners of the Veruan, the Ixal, the Gravan, and dozens more, each one earned through fire and ash and unity, not conquest. The Empire fell not with screams, but with a whisper, as the stars blinked open to a future not ruled by fear, but lit by hope. And Earth stood among them proud and unbroken, a world once called weak, now known as the spark that brought the darkness down. The war had ended, but the galaxy still trembled, because the fall of the Zarnak Empire left behind more than ruins. It left behind fear, silent scars, and empty space, once filled by power and control, now waiting to be claimed. But Earth did not come to conquer, it came to rebuild, and with every shattered city, every broken system, every freed planet, the people saw something new, not just soldiers from Earth, but builders, thinkers, teachers, and voices of hope. From the ashes of the Empire rose a coalition, not of flags or borders, but of shared pain and purpose, and at the center of it all stood Earth, still scarred, still healing, still fierce, but now shining with something brighter than any weapon. In the orbit above, what was once Zarnak Prime, human engineers worked side by side with Veron architects to construct the first Interstellar Council station, a massive ring of steel and light meant not for war, but for unity and understanding. Every beam carried the weight of what had been lost and the hope of what might be built. Inside the halls of the station, voices echoed in dozens of languages, some once silenced by chains now rising with power and pride. They spoke of justice, of balance, of shared strength and responsibility, and each time Earth's representatives stepped forward, they did not speak for domination. They spoke for the weak, for the quiet, for the forgotten. On the distant world of Yelvin, where machines had ruled over organic life, for centuries Earth sent a team, not with guns, but with coders and medics, and soon the control systems collapsed, not from violence, but from knowledge, and the people of Yelvin saw the stars for the first time in generations. In the shattered cities of the Gravan sector, where famine had taken more than war, Earth dropped not bombs, but food, water, seeds, and tools, old things, simple things, things that meant life, and the people there built gardens in the ruins and carved the word Earth into stone in gratitude. Humanity understood pain, and because of that it understood healing, and where the Empire had once demanded tribute, Earth offered help without price. But not all was peace, because not all who watched were pleased. There were powers in the shadows, remnants of the old order, slavers, warlords, tyrants waiting for the light to fade so they might rise again, but Earth did not look away. It saw them, it knew them, and it remembered. On the black world of Morvac, where children were taken for cruel experiments, a human task force led a mission under silence and storm, disabling the labs, freeing the victims, and broadcasting the evidence to every corner of the galaxy. And those who ran that place were hunted by their own people before Earth's ships even left orbit. In the void between stars, rogue fleets tried to rebuild the chains of empire using stolen Zarnak tech, but Earth's allies stood together, now no longer afraid. And when they struck, it was with coordination, speed, and justice, not revenge, but necessity. Earth did not build an empire, but it became something stronger. It became a symbol, not of perfection, not of purity, not even of peace, but of resistance, of resilience, of what happens when a species refuses to die. On Earth itself, cities were still being rebuilt, forests regrown, families reunited, and names carved into stone and wood and metal to remember every life given, not just for Earth, but for everyone who called the stars home. Children born after the war grew up hearing stories not of kings or generals, but of farmers who fought with shovels, engineers who hacked alien code with joypads, teenagers who carried messages through fire, and old women who turned villages into fortresses with nothing but love and will. They learned that being human was not about strength or power, but about standing when every bone wanted to fall, about fighting for others, about choosing hope when fear seemed easier. The first human school off Earth opened on the moon of Taurex, once a mining slave colony, now a place of learning where young minds from dozens of species sat side by side to study the stars and write a new story. The teachers there were not only from Earth, they were from every world that had been freed, and together they crafted a curriculum built not on empire or conquest, but on memory, empathy, and possibility. At the heart of the school stood a statue, not of a soldier, but of a child holding a flower carved from asteroid metal, and beneath it words that read in every language. We remember, so we rise. There were still threats, still dangers, still dark corners in the galaxy where cruelty waited, but now there were eyes watching, voices ready to speak, hands ready to act, and Earth was always among them. When a plague broke out on the world of Sarin, Earth sent ships filled with medicine grown in old human labs, and doctors who had once treated battlefield wounds, now stitching life into the sick with steady hands. When a civil war threatened the peace on Viral, it was a human diplomat, a young man who once ran resistance messages through sniper zones, who stood before both sides and reminded them what they had seen when the Empire fell and what they would lose if they turned on each other. Slowly, steadily, painfully, the galaxy began to heal, not all at once, not everywhere, but enough to matter, enough to show that change was not just possible, it was real. And through it all, Earth remained not perfect, not above, not untouched, but always willing to stand. In the quiet corners of forgotten planets, people painted Earth's flag, not out of worship, but as a sign that they too would not kneel, that they too would rise. And in the great halls of the Interstellar Council, Earth's seat remained open to all who sought it, a symbol of the journey from fire to flame, from ruin to reason. A young child on Earth once asked her grandmother, "What does it mean to be human now?" The old woman smiled and said, "It means we fight, not to conquer, but to protect, not to destroy, but to rebuild, not because we are better, but because we remember when we were broken too." And somewhere far beyond the old empire, beyond the light of known stars, in a small village on a green world, a former Zarnak soldier, now farmer, placed a single seed into the soil and whispered prayer, not to gods, but to peace. And above him the sky stretched wide and clear and filled with stars that now belonged to everyone. Because Earth had taught them not just how to survive, but how to begin again.